that is my good friend Stace Nelson, who drove all the way down here from eastern South Dakota. And there isn't a man that has instilled more hope in a lot of people across the state than Stace Nelson. And I really appreciate his service to the people of the state of South Dakota. So I'd like you to give him another round of applause. You know, in our education, we all had the benefit of American history, to some degree, of course. The most important piece of that is the radical document that started all of this, and that is the Declaration of Independence. At that time, that was nothing more than what Stace is, radicalism, thinking for yourself, thinking outside the box. How dare a people think that they can rule themselves in what was considered a democracy, the first democracy? We had always been ruled by kings, and up until that point, we hadn't had this great experiment that has led the world in innovation and moving us all forward economically. And it's all about liberty. It's all about liberty, both economically and liberty from the standpoint of making our own decisions as individuals. Now, we've kind of gone off the rails over the years, but what it is about is our liberty. I want to speak with you briefly of something. This is my copy of the Federalist Papers, and I don't know how many of you. I would imagine a group of these folks has a pretty good idea of what the Federalist Papers are. Now, even the courts, the United States Supreme Court, look to the Federalist Papers to interpret the Constitution of the United States of America. And I think that it's important that we get back to what the founders put forth as what we intended with the Constitution. And the Federalist Papers were a number of anonymous writings done for the purpose of persuading the people of New York State to adopt the Constitution. And they were written by such people as James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton, who all of you probably have heard of in the past. One thing that's important here, and this applies to what I do or what I try to do in Pierre, and probably exactly what Stace Nelson tries to do every day when he's there. I want to read to you a quote, and this is from Madison, the 45th of the Federalist Papers. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects, such as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which the last power of taxation will be, for the most part, be connected. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger, those of the state governments in times of peace and prosperity. I think that it's rather obvious from that reading of Madison's that the idea of the federal government was to essentially protect us from the outside, and that the states were to have the majority of the power in the federal system. Now, we all know that the federal system now and the federal government exerts a great amount of authority over the states. And numerous pieces of legislation, we all think about the federal government as this forcing all of these rules and regulations onto our lives, the hundreds of thousands of pages of regulations that are put into place every year through the Federal Register. But what we don't understand is the impact that the state government also has and acts as essentially an agent for the federal government. For instance, recently we all have probably had to go and get our driver's licenses renewed. All of those rules and regulations came down from on high from the federal government. But how they did it to us and why we passed it, by the way, Governor Rounds, who's running for the United States Senate, put that in place and was very eager in that, because the first time it came through the House, we killed it on the floor of the House. The very next day, they had twisted enough arms to get it passed. But the interesting piece of that is that we are the agent. We are the people. The state of South Dakota is who is enforcing that law on you on behalf of the federal government. But we not only, I believe, have certain rights as states, but we also have certain responsibilities, and that is to protect our people and to make sure that in the federal system that we are in fact a check on the federal power. But unfortunately, we no longer have the ability to say no because we're so addicted to the money. Just like a dope addict is, we have been hooked and we take it, and we take it, and we take it. And it's a litany of issues. For instance, you may not think that illegal immigration is something that impacts us here in South Dakota. Did you know that in 2008, the #1 prosecution in the federal courts in South Dakota was illegal immigrants? The #1 prosecution over any other charging documents that are done by the federal district attorneys here in South Dakota is illegal immigration. So what does Stace Nelson do? He brings a bill in the legislature for 2 or 3 consecutive years to simply make it a crime to adopt the Arizona law, which would make it a crime to knowingly hire illegal immigrants. That was killed, and it was killed with the testimony of someone who works for the governor of the state of South Dakota, just to enforce the law, to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to in terms of the federal system to protect all of you taxpayers. Because every time one of these people who are not, that are employed here for a substandard rate of money has a problem and has to go to the hospital, who pays for it? You do. You do. Either through the government or through some kind of a cost shift in the system that we have for health care. There are a litany of issues that have that the state of South Dakota is essentially an agent for the federal government. And we need to have leaders like Stace Nelson who will go to Pierre and make sure that we are doing what we are supposed to do in the federal system to protect all of your rights. Interesting thing, as we talk about the Second Amendment, did you know that the Obama administration, before the Sandy Hook, everybody got killed there at that school in Connecticut? Did you know that the Obama administration cut $300 million out of school safety programs? And did you know that they filibustered bringing a bill that would have restored that $300 million, the Democratic majority in the United States Senate? The other interesting piece is they are concerned about your and my rights, our constitutional rights, and infringing upon them. Thou shalt not infringe on the Second Amendment rights. Well, that's exactly what they're attempting to do. And in 2010, out of the 48,000 people who were caught through the federal system, felons and fugitives trying to get firearms through the current system, you know how many prosecutions there were?
44.
44 in 2010, out of 48,000 felons and fugitives trying to get firearms. Now you tell me who is not doing their job in this constitutional system. Instead, the Obama administration is selling the same weapons they want to ban for me and you to Mexican drug cartels across the border. This is what they're doing. This is more than dereliction of duty. I think that it's to the level of almost treason.
It is treason.
That we would essentially be putting firearms, semi-automatic rifles in the hands of people, and they end up using them against our Border Patrol agents. There have been a couple of Border Patrol agents that have been killed because of these firearms that Eric Holder and the Obama administration sold across the border. Folks, we have a lot to do. We're outnumbered. We're outgunned.
No, we're not.
We're outgunned at the federal system.
No, we're not.
We've got a few new conservatives in the United States Senate. I spoke to a lobbyist 2 weeks ago about the gun control legislation that just got killed. The Democrats were stunned. They were stunned because they thought it was going to pass. But it got killed, and it got killed because of the new freshman Republican legislators that we have, Rubio, Lee, and Cruz. Those folks are trying to protect us, and we need to send them somebody who will help and not essentially simply collaborate with the Democrats. And that's why when you look at Senator, former governor who wants to be a Senator Rounds, we need to make a real good, educated choice in the Republican Party primary. And the reason is it doesn't matter if it was implementing Obamacare. Did you know that the legislature streamlined, dovetailed our insurance laws 2 or 3 years ago for the implementation of Obamacare? There's a lot of denial out there about the fact that that's what happened, but that's exactly what happened. If you look at 2011 Senate Bills 38 and 43, that's what those did. They dovetailed our insurance laws to Obamacare. And who put those pieces of legislation forward for the legislature? Mike Rounds, on his way out the door. When he also left us a $127 million deficit to deal with. We had to cut 10% of our budget. Did you know that Mike Rounds, in the 8 years he was governor, had one budget that didn't spend millions of dollars that it shouldn't have spent? Every year but one, we spent more money than we took in state government when he was governor. And you say, well, how could that possibly be? Well, remember Governor Jankel put in place the property tax reduction fund that accumulated a lot of dollars? And also remember George Mickelson had the rainy day fund? He was living off their legacies, folks. So when we are at a critical stage, our country is on the precipice of bankruptcy because of poor policy and going along to get along. We do not need to send another collaborator to Washington, D.C. We need a fixer. We need somebody like a Ted Cruz or maybe a Stace Nelson. I could go on and on and on about all of the sins that we see in here and that we see in Washington, D.C. But every year we've got a balanced budget in Pierre. We did such a good job, and we pat ourselves on the back so hard that you think we'd break our right arm. But how many of you knew that this year the budget that we passed, the quote-unquote balanced budget that we passed, we added more than a half a dozen programs, including one to subsidize rural lawyers? How many of you knew that? How many of you knew that we added 120 new employees in 1 year? 120. That's an ongoing expense to state government, wouldn't you say? How many of you knew that we will spend in the next fiscal year 92 to 93 million more than we spent this fiscal year? Now remember the figure that I gave you a little bit earlier? 127 million was 10% of our budget. Well, now, in 1 year, after making $127 million worth of cuts, in 1 year, we added 92 to $93 million back in. Now, and the other thing is that we spent down our reserve that Governor Mickelson had of 5%. He always kept 5%. We're below that for the next fiscal year. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of work to do, because not only do we as states have a responsibility and certain rights, but each one of us have rights and responsibilities in this system. And we have duties. We all have a duty, each and every one of us, to make sure that we pass on this Constitution and what our government has given to us, what the founders gave to us. We have to pass that on to the next generation. That is our duty. These people are destroying our country. And let's just be honest. That may sound radical, but what in fact are they doing? They're attacking the family. They're attacking every foundational instrument that we have in this country. And we need to fight for it. And each of you, I want to thank you for being here today, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in the future of the country and fighting for what the founders set forth for each and every one of us. And for that, I thank you. Last night, I was at the Custer County Lincoln Day dinner, and what I want to tell you is there's hope. And the reason there's hope is because there's nearly as many people here today to listen to Stace Nelson as there were in Custer last night to listen to the governor. So, you may think that there's not that many people here and that we can't do great things with a small number of people. But remember, there were 56 people that signed the Declaration of Independence. 56. 5 of them were tortured before they were murdered by the British. 12 of them were killed fighting in the American Revolution. 2 of them had sons that were killed, and a dozen of them had their houses burned. How many of our political class in Washington, D.C. today would suffer what our founders did? How many? Very few. And that's what the problem is with our country. So get to work. Let's make sure we have a United States Senator who lives up to our values and what the founders set forth for us. Thank you.